At its peak, this empire controlled more land than any force in human history. Not the British Empire, not Rome, not even the empire of Alexander the Great. It stretched from Eastern Europe to the shores of the Pacific Ocean, from frozen forests to burning deserts, from small nomadic camps to the largest cities on Earth. An empire built without stone castles, without permanent borders, without a single capital for most of its existence. And yet, for a moment in history, it seemed completely unstoppable. But its downfall did not begin with a great defeat. It did not start with rebellion or invasion. It began quietly, with a decision that made perfect sense at the time, a decision that slowly changed the fate of the largest empire the world has ever known. This story begins on the vast Eurasian steppe, a land defined by movement. Here, survival depended on speed, endurance, and loyalty. Generations grew up on horseback. Entire lives were shaped by the rhythm of migration. And from this harsh world emerged a man named Temujin, a man born into poverty, betrayal, and exile. History would remember him as Genghis Khan. But before the title, before the empire, he was simply a survivor. Temujin did not inherit power. He earned it. He watched alliances fail, families fall apart, and leaders betray their own people. From these experiences, he learned a lesson that would define everything that followed. Loyalty mattered more than blood. Competence mattered more than tradition. Under his leadership, positions were earned, not inherited. For the first time on the steppe, tribes were united not by ancestry, but by shared purpose. What followed was not chaos. It was structure. Genghis Khan built a military system unlike anything the world had seen. Units were organized with mathematical precision. Communication was constant. Scouts gathered intelligence far ahead of the main forces, and discipline was absolute. Each soldier knew his role. Each commander was accountable. The Mongol armies moved faster than any force before them. They could cross distances in days that took others weeks. They adapted quickly. If one strategy failed, another followed immediately. Psychological warfare became a weapon. Cities were offered a choice: submit and be spared, resist and be destroyed. The message spread faster than the armies themselves. Fear became a force multiplier. Within a single lifetime, Mongol forces conquered vast territories. Northern China fell. Central Asia collapsed. Persian cities were taken. Eastern Europe faced armies it had never imagined. Yet, conquest was only part of the story, because once the fighting stopped, something unexpected happened: order. Trade routes reopened. The Silk Road flourished under Mongol protection. Merchants traveled safely across thousands of kilometers. Ideas moved with them. Technologies spread. Knowledge crossed borders that had once been closed for centuries. For the first time, much of Eurasia functioned as a connected system. Violent, yes, but astonishingly efficient. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, the world expected the empire to shatter. Most empires do. They depend on one central figure. Remove that figure and everything collapses. But this time, it did not. The system held. Successors expanded the empire even further. Under leaders like Genghis Khan, the Mongols pushed deeper into Europe. Under Kublai Khan, they conquered all of China. Kublai would later rule as emperor of the Yuan dynasty, governing millions from a permanent capital. By the mid-13th century, the Mongol Empire had reached its absolute peak. It was not only the largest land empire in history, it was one of the most complex systems ever created. And that complexity became its greatest challenge. The empire was too large. Orders took time to travel. Local conditions varied drastically. A decision that worked in China made little sense in Persia. What had once been unified by movement now struggled with administration. The leadership faced a dilemma. How do you govern the largest empire on Earth without losing control? The answer seemed obvious. Divide responsibility, decentralize power, trust local rulers. And so a decision was made. The Mongol Empire was divided into 4 major khanates. The Golden Horde ruled Eastern Europe and Russia. The Ilkhanate governed Persia and the Middle East. The Chagatai Khanate controlled Central Asia, and the Yuan dynasty ruled China under Kublai Khan. Each Khanate was led by members of the ruling family. Each was expected to remain loyal to the greater Mongol cause. Because power, once divided, develops its own gravity, each region adapted to local cultures. Local elites gained influence. Economic interests began to differ. Trade routes became points of competition, not cooperation. And loyalties slowly shifted from the empire as a whole to individual khanates. At the same time, the world was changing. The Mongol system had worked because it was ahead of its time, but others were learning. Conquered regions adopted Mongol tactics. Fortifications improved. Gunpowder weapons emerged. The technological gap closed. Then came the plague. In the 14th century, the Black Death swept across Eurasia. The same trade routes that once connected the empire now carried devastation. Cities collapsed. Populations shrank. Tax systems failed. Military manpower disappeared. The system that relied on movement and coordination began to slow. One by one, the Khanates weakened. The Yuan dynasty was overthrown in China. The Ilkhanate fractured under internal conflict. The Chagatai Khanate dissolved into smaller states. The Golden Horde gradually lost control as new powers rose in Eastern Europe. There was no single final battle, no dramatic end. The empire did not collapse. It faded. And this is the true lesson of the Mongol Empire. It was not destroyed by enemies. It was undone by a decision made in good faith. The decision to divide power saved the empire in the short term, but it removed the one thing that had made it unstoppable. History repeats this pattern again and again. Companies grow too large. Organizations become too complex. Control is decentralized for efficiency. And slowly, cohesion disappears. What once moved as one becomes many forces pulling in different directions. The greatest empire in human history was not defeated on the battlefield. It was undone at the table by one decision.